Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I released a video on Monday discussing the outlier must-have spells in the Player's Handbook that could be addressed with the new Player's Handbook coming out in 2024, and I gave some ideas on how we might address them. I mentioned in that video that there are also spells that are overly weak, and I said fixing those spells probably isn't an imperative because, if we get the 2024 Player's Handbook and they're not fixed, they aren't really causing the same kind of problem to the game as overpowered spells do. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't have a better game if they were addressed. And based on a number of comments on my Outlier Spells video, sounds like diving into that subject might be fun. And the good news is that we are talking about buffing spells, and I'll be honest, it's a lot less uncomfortable to buff stuff than to nerf it. I don't need to give you a trigger warning or anything. The other piece of good news is these spells might actually get buffed. Maybe in the way I present in this video, or some other way. But when you take a bad option and make it better, and then you present it in your playtest, it's just going to get a more positive response than nerfing stuff. Maybe it shouldn't be that way, but that is the way it is. Now, my goal here isn't to make any of these spells into very powerful spells. The goal is to just bring them in line with the bulk of other spells of their level. So some of these buffs aren't going to end up being overly dramatic. I'm also only going to cover Player's Handbook spells, so I'm not going to talk about Elemental Bane, even though it is really underpowered, with one exception. There is one spell that needs a boost that isn't in the 2014 Player's Handbook that we have reason to believe will be in the 2024 one. And two things I kept in mind as I went through these. The designers have said that we will have the same spells in the 2024 Player's Handbook with the same spell names and the same spell levels, so changing names or spell levels, that wasn't a possibility I considered for any of these. So let's begin. And we'll start with cantrips and Produce Flame. So Produce Flame is a ranged cantrip for druids, and with, get this, the same range as one of their melee cantrips. So yeah, same range as a melee cantrip. Thorn Whip, except this one gives you disadvantage if you're in melee range. I looked at every other ranged spell attack cantrip in the game, and none of them have less than a 60-foot range except for this one. So why? Is it because of the damage? Because the D8 damage is average for a cantrip? Because of the secondary effect? Well, let's talk about that, because the secondary effect to Produce Flame is you can hold it for 10 feet of bright light and 10 feet of dim, which is hardly anything, and as soon as you throw the flame, you lose the light. So if you're actually counting on this for light, then you can't really throw it. And if you want light, this is just so much worse than the light cantrip. You need a free hand, you can't move it except when you move, it still gives you a terrible short-range source of light. That doesn't even reach out to the potential targets of this spell, even with a lousy 30-foot range. So I figure to fix this, the first thing I would do is increase the range to 60 feet, and you increase the light, so it's 30 feet of bright light and 30 feet of dim. That's the same as a lantern, and that's something you would also hold in your hand. And I figure the range of the light it provides should match the range of the cantrip. And the final thing I would do is, if you use your action to throw the flame, it does not end the spell. So you throw the flame and immediately there's flame in your hand again, so you don't lose the light. If that's going to be the secondary effect, you should be able to benefit from that secondary effect. And the other cantrip we're going to talk about, of course, is True Strike, because this is the most obvious entry on this list. The problem is simple. The benefit of advantage on one attack is simply not worth an action and concentration. The most common fix I see suggested for this is to make it a bonus action. But I still think it would be a pretty bad cantrip. That's how bad this cantrip starts out. So the fix I would suggest, I didn't come up with. It was suggested by, I'm going to say, TomberryJX on my Discord, and I liked it, and I asked if I could borrow their idea, and they were fine with it. They said, why not make this like the playtest version of Resistance or Guidance, where you use your reaction after a failed attack roll to add a d4, but limit the range to 10 feet. And I really like the sound of that. Though, giving it more thought, one concern I have is if you changed it to do that, it would come up all the time. Like, failed ability checks and saving throws for guidance and resistance, respectively, they just don't come up nearly as often as failed attack rolls. So the True Strike character would constantly be throwing their reaction in other players' turns to boost that attack by d4. I mean, why not? Especially if you're up next and you haven't used your reaction. So I figure you could do that, but make the range self. Then it's not interrupting anyone. You throw your chromatic orb or your firebolt or whatever. You miss by 1 or 2, so you expend your reaction to add a d4. And there is some risk to doing that because your reaction will be gone for the entire round. But it would still be a decent cantrip, and I'd want it on some of my builds. So let's move on to level 1. Color Spray. So the mechanics of Color Spray have some similarities to Sleep, where you roll some dice and you compare them to the hit points of those in the area. So that's a problem right off the bat, because monster hit point scaling just doesn't work well with this kind of mechanic. But Sleep is overpowered at first level and scales terribly, while Color Spray is underpowered at first level and scales terribly. I mean, you get more and bigger dice in Sleep, 6d10 instead of 5d8, but this is a tiny 15-foot cone. It is hard to place or set up so that you will hit multiple creatures, and those affected are blinded for 1 round instead of unconscious for 1 minute. Not that Sleep should be the bar for how powerful this spell should be. And I mean, blinded is still pretty bad. Blindness Deafness is a level 2 spell, and it only affects 1 target unless we upcast it, but it can last more than 1 round. It can actually last several rounds. I think you could make this a Constitution saving throw, honestly. That means you would need to change the upcast mechanics. But if we are going to change the upcast mechanics, I'd take some inspiration from the Confusion spell, where upcasting allows you to increase the area. So we have a 15-foot cone, but for each spell level, we could add 5 feet to the size of the cone. Compelled Duel. I love the idea of this spell for paladins, that you pick out a target and as a bonus action, you compel them to fight you mono-a-mono. Just doesn't do that very well. The creature gets a saving throw, you use your concentration, it can move freely as long as it stays within 30 feet of you, and it gets additional saving throws to ignore even that restriction. And it can still freely attack other creatures. It will have disadvantage, but it doesn't prevent them from attacking them. And of course, they're not really restricted at all if they have spells or area of effect stuff. Oh, and you can't attack any other creature, even if it provokes an opportunity attack from you. So you cast this spell, you're the one who expended the spell slot, you're the one who's concentrating on it, but your target can attack other creatures, and you can't. That's not fair. Here's what I would change. First, I'd remove the restriction where you can't attack another creature. Second, if the creature attempts to move, it cannot move further away from you. Circle you, fine, but no moving away. You could keep in the part where it makes a saving throw to avoid that for 1 turn. And finally, I would allow this to be upcast to target 1 additional creature with each spell level, which is why the restriction on attacking another creature would need to be removed. Hail of Thorns. So this is just a notoriously awful first level ranger spell. It's a bonus action to cast, uses concentration, and the next time you hit with a ranged weapon attack, you do a d10 additional damage to the creature with a dex save for half, and the same to creatures within 5 feet of the target. So given the saving throw, I would expect about the same damage from this as from Hunter's Mark, except this is 1 attack, while Hunter's Mark keeps going like the Energizer Bunny, and it's not like Hunter's Mark is overpowered. The lone advantage here is the area of effect, which is small, but it is in line with first level spells. It's a bit like Ice Knife, but it does less damage, and it inexplicably uses concentration. I guess it upcasts better, though. Now, they pretty much address this kind of mechanic with the playtest Smite spells, and I'd expect the same treatment here. This should not be concentration or need a duration. It should be a bonus action that you take after hitting the target with the attack. I think that would make this fine. Ray of Sickness. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Chromatic Orb is not a very good spell. 3d8 is not good enough damage for a single target. but Chromatic Orb isn't on this list because although it's on the weaker side, there's worse spells of the same level, like this one. So let's say they had taken Chromatic Orb and decide to use that as a standard for creating this spell. So they're going to remove the choice of the damage type and make it poison. Then they're going to reduce the range from 90 feet to 60 feet. And those are both significant debuffs. So let's add a saving throw against being poisoned for 1 round so we get a benefit to make up for those. And, that wouldn't sound like an unfair trade to me. But they also reduce the damage by a d8. So now it's a darned unfair trade. And I think the fix is pretty simple. Put that d8 back in. 3d8 poison damage, and we're done. It still has a lower range. We still can't choose our damage type. We're getting a crappy damage type, but we have a chance to poison for 1 round. Though I'm still probably not taking poison damage spells unless I see significant changes in monster design, but that's another issue. Witch Bolt. It's not quite as notorious as True Strike, but Witch Bolt does bad damage for a first level spell. It uses your concentration and allows you, if you hit, to continue to use your concentration and actions on subsequent rounds to continue doing damage that's really bad, and if you do anything else with your action, the spell ends. It also ends if the target just moves out of range, which is only 30 feet. How would we fix this? Well, first, I'd remove the attack roll and make it a saving throw spell. So make a dexterity save or take full damage, half on a successful saving throw. And if they fail the saving throw, they're dazed for the duration of the spell. Here's the dazed condition. You can move or take 1 action on your turn, not both, and you lose bonus actions and reactions. The target is being electrocuted. Muscles seize up. Might be worth the caster continuing to use their action every round to keep this condition going, as well as deliver that additional d12 damage. And I don't think you need to provide repeated saving throws, because the creature is dazed, but they can still escape the range of the spell, usually without too much difficulty. But if they are dazed, they are going to take a penalty for doing so. So I think that's a reasonable trade-off. Level 2, Alter Self. So this is a 2nd level spell, which lasts for up to 1 hour using concentration, and you can choose one of these 3 effects. You can breathe underwater, and you get a swim speed. You can change your appearance, or you can get a natural weapon that does a d6 damage with a +1 to hit and damage. So I suppose the reason for concentration here is that you can use your action to change the benefit you chose, or change your appearance if that's the option you chose, and when you're constantly making changes to spells, they would normally have concentration. But it is kind of glaring that you look at Disguise Self, which is 1st level and doesn't use concentration, and then you got Water Breathing, which is practically free after 3rd level spells are available, and the natural weapon here is pretty bad. So this just isn't the power level I'd expect from a 2nd level spell. So the first thing I'd do is I'd have the natural weapon use your casting ability score for attack rolls and damage, right? That seems pretty obvious. Second, I would change it to read that when you cast a spell, you choose any of the following options, the effects of which last the duration of the spell. While the spell lasts, you can add, remove, or alter the options of your choice as an action. So if you want to have the water breathing and the swim speed and disguise yourself as something else, you can do that at the same time. Crown of Madness. So you choose a humanoid within range, they make a wisdom saving throw, or they're charmed by you for the duration. While they are charmed, the target must use its action before moving on each of its turns to make a melee attack against a creature other than itself that you chose. Here's the kicker though. The target can act normally on its turn if you chose no creature or if none were within reach. And you must use your action on your turn to maintain control over the target or the spell ends, and the creature gets another wisdom save at the end of each of its turns to end the spell. So if you were to fall victim to this spell, you have no worries. All you have to do is make sure nobody is in melee with you at the start of your turn, and then you can just ignore this spell. And the caster has to concentrate and continually use their action to maintain it, and it's doing nothing to you at all. Great spell, right? So how do we fix that? Well, I think it's pretty simple. You allow the creature to attack itself. So you remove that restriction. You keep the action to maintain the spell and the repeated saving throw, all that stuff. Just let the creature attack itself, and now at the beginning of its turn, there's always going to be an applicable target. And I think you fix it. Find traps. Obviously, this was going to be here because the spell doesn't find traps, and that's the problem. It reveals that a trap is somewhere within your line of sight, but it does not locate it. It specifies here right at the end. The spell merely reveals that a trap is present, so that line has to go. Then it says you don't learn the location of each trap, but you do learn the general nature of the danger posed by the trap you sense. So that needs to change to you learn the location of each trap and also learn the general nature of the danger posed by the trap you sense. And then it's done. Flame Blade. So this lasts up to 10 minutes with concentration, and you can use your action to make a melee attack that does 3d6 fire damage. And it sheds a bit of light. And that's basically it. The damage here is just too low. Flaming Sphere is 2d6 with your bonus action, and you might do the damage more than once per round. Moonbeam is 2d10 damage, and you might not need your action at all, and you can easily inflict the damage more than once per round, and potentially to multiple targets. And those are not top tier spells. Neither of those require you move into melee either. This should probably be 3d10 at least, with the upcast option scaling at a d10 as well. I still don't think this would be great, but if you did that, at least it would be okay. Melf's Acid Arrow. So this is a second level spell, single target within 90 feet, make an attack roll, and if it hits, the target takes 44 acid damage and another 2d4 at the end of its next turn. And if you miss, the target takes half of the 44 and none of the 2d4. And then you upcast for another d4 added to each roll. Now, if you were to cast Magic Missile at second level, you do 44 plus 4 immediately, force damage, and you do not have to roll to hit. Now, I get why they're using d4s here. It's because the upcast affects both rolls. So on a hit, that adds 2d4. I mean, eventually, they have to take the secondary damage. So thematically, the idea here is because of the acid splashing when you cast a spell, the target is still taking damage if you miss, and I like that. But if it took full damage when you missed, it would still do less than an upcast magic missile. So that secondary damage needs to be relevant. So here's my suggestion. 44 damage when you cast a spell. That's it. But if you hit the target, the acid sticks to them, delivering another 44 at the end of their next turn. Upcast for another d4 to both rolls. Ray of Enfeeblement. So you cast Ray of Enfeeblement, which lasts up to a minute using concentration, and you make a ranged spell attack, and if you miss, well, too bad for you, spell's over. If you hit, the target does half damage with weapon attacks using strength until the spell ends, and it makes a constitution saving throw at the end of each of its turns to end the spell. So it does not help that monster stat blocks do not tell you whether their attacks are using strength or not. I mean, often you can figure it out, but sometimes you actually can't. So this spell isn't even compatible with current monster design. Secondly, this provides a pretty mild debuff on a hit that's easily shaken off using concentration. And this adds a bunch of extra math calculations, and it can slow your game down. I figure, first of all, we remove the saving throw. You hit, it works. But we get rid of the half damage thing. What it does, it gives you disadvantage on strength checks, strength saving throws, and attack rolls for the duration. And then, Summon Beast. So I'm going to make this quick. Summon Beast is in Tasha's, but apparently it will be in the 2024 Player's Handbook. That's why I'm going to cover it here in this video. Because Summon Beast is, mostly okay. In fact, as a second level spell, I think it's just fine. The problem is the upcasting. Tasha's summoning spells universally add double or more the hit points with upcasting than Summon Beast does. This makes upcasting Summon Beast uniquely bad in comparison. So you got to make the plus 5 additional hit points per spell level a plus 10. You do that, and this is fine. But I hope they make that change when this gets published in the 2014 Player's Handbook. We're on to level 3 spells. Lightning Arrow. So it's Hail of Thorns all over again, but it's actually worse because you need to choose to use this before you roll the attack. So if you miss, you only do the 2d8 secondary damage in the small area with a save for half with a 3rd level spell. Oh, and you replace your arrow damage with a flat 4d8, which could end up being less than what you might have done with an arrow. So you make this a bonus action to use when you hit with a ranged weapon attack, no concentration, like they've done with the smite spells. I think that's a good mechanic. The ammunition transforms into a lightning bolt when you cast a spell. Then, instead of the target taking 48 lightning damage, you say the weapon's damage for this attack is 48 lightning. So you can add your modifiers as you would normally for the weapon. Stinking Cloud. So with Stinking Cloud, you basically create a fog cloud, except creatures at the start of their turn make a Constitution saving throw against poison or they lose their action, unless they don't need to breathe. Then they move out of the cloud and they're fine. And that's the spell. Now I'm telling you right now, there is no way this spell isn't going to get changed before the 2024 Player's Handbook. You do not make saving throws against poison anymore. You make saving throws to avoid the poisoned condition. And this spell doesn't give you the poison condition. So I would expect either the spell will give the poison condition or that wording is going to be removed. I think the poison condition makes sense though. They've already equated disease with the poison condition in their design notes in the playtest. Stinking Cloud makes you sick. So you lose your action and you gain the poison condition, which normally wouldn't matter because you lost your action. But here's how you buff this spell. A creature that has the poison condition from this spell repeats their saving throw at the start of each of their turns until the spell ends, ending the condition on a success. Make it have nothing to do with them being in the cloud anymore. So even if they leave the cloud, they remain poisoned until they make their saving throw. They just don't lose their action anymore. And if you think about it, kind of makes sense. Imagine you were in a stinking cloud and it made you sick and nauseous and you step out. Are you immediately better? Probably not. Moving on to level 4, Grasping Vine. So Grasping Vine is a spell where you concentrate up to 1 minute, and as a bonus action, you get some potential force movement towards a static source, dexterity saving throw to avoid it. I mean, if this was a 2nd level spell, I think it'd be fine. But I've already imposed, there's no changing levels here. They're not going to change the level of Grasping Vine, so there's no point me suggesting it. So how do we make Grasping Vine worth a 4th level spell? I think we can do that. The idea is the vine is grabbing the creature, so that's the grappled condition right there, right? Then it pulls them 20 feet, and that would make them prone, right? Now I would put a limit on grappling and proning to large size or smaller creatures, and say that in order to have the vine grasp another creature, it does need to let go, so that ends the grapple condition on any creature that grappled previously. The escape DC would be your spell DC, of course. Leomund's Secret Chest. So this spell hides a chest on the ethereal plane, so that's very circumstantial, but it's okay. Circumstantial spells have their place. Here is the issue right here. After 60 days, there's a building chance that the chest is irretrievably lost. I don't know why that's there. It's not like the spell is abusable by not restricting the duration. The spell ends if you cast it again, so you're not stacking a million chests. And I do get why that restriction is there. So let's just get rid of this sentence. If that creates any problems with this spell, let me know, but I don't see any. Phantasmal Killer. Okay, so they done messed up with this. I am resigned to the fact there are a lot of spells that target one creature, and if they make their saving throw, nothing happens. Fine. But if they fail their saving throw, the result shouldn't be just worse than a lower level spell that targets multiple creatures, and Fear is a 3rd level spell. And not only does it frighten creatures in a 30-foot cone, but they're panicked, and they have to use their action to dash away, and they drop anything they're holding. And they don't even repeat the saving throw, but they should. See my video from Monday. Anyways, this just gives them the condition, and then maybe they take some damage, because they don't take any damage at first, and they have to fail a 2nd saving throw later on to take 4d10 psychic damage. This is just really bad. The upcast option is bad too. I mean, how bad is the upcasting option? It does nothing at all unless they fail 2 saving throws in a row. Nothing unless they fail 2 saving throws in a row. That's a good use of your higher level slot. This is a 4th level spell. I think we have to make this 60-10. That's comparable to the damage of a fireball to a single target. But also, they should take the 60-10 right away and are frightened. And if they make their saving throw, they take half damage, not frightened. Then another 60-10 at the end of each of their turns, unless they make a save, in which case no damage and the spell ends. The upcasting improves as well, because at least now you're guaranteed to do at least some extra damage, even if they make their first saving throw. Stoneskin. So there's 2 problems with Stoneskin. The first is that gold cost is a bad way to balance a spell. And the second is, why is this limited to non-magical damage? I mean, we know they're getting rid of that anyways, so I would assume that's going to be removed. So that's first. You just get resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. Barbarians could do it from level 1, and I suspect that change is pretty much a given. But second, remove the costly component. Make it rock dust instead of diamond dust. Honestly, for a 4th level spell requiring concentration, getting resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing isn't overpowered. It's fine. Level 5, Dream. So there are 2 parts to this spell. The first is you can cast it and appear in the dream of someone far away. Nice. You can communicate, and it's like sending, but the communication can be way more intricate. The second part is you can turn their dream into a nightmare if the target of the spell is someone you don't like, in which case they make a wisdom saving throw, or they don't benefit from the rest and they take 3d6 psychic damage when they wake up. And that ends up being pretty circumstantial, but it can be pretty nasty in that circumstantial way. I mean, if the target has legendary resistances, this isn't really going to do anything, but there's still occasional uses where I've found that part handy. So we have 2 uses: long-term whittling down of an enemy, which is pretty circumstantial but kind of cool, and we have this use for utility for long-range communication. Here's the problem though. If you cast a spell and the target doesn't happen to be sleeping, then you have to wait in a trance until they fall asleep, or you lose a spell and the 5th level slot. And give this spell the ritual tag. This is a great candidate to be a ritual. For the utility use, rituals are fine. For the nightmare use, it's already capped at once per sleep, so we can't spam the spell. Gesh. So when you put a Gesh on someone, it's pretty circumstantial because you need a minute to cast this. So it's not a combat thing. But if that target fails a wisdom saving throw, they become charmed by you, and then you can give that target instructions, and the target can ignore them. It'll take 5d10 psychic damage once per day, but yeah, that's just not what this spell promises. So I would change this bit right here. But no more than once each day should read no more than once each minute. So the creature can have little bursts of disobeying you with taking some damage, but if they just completely ignore you, it will kill them. Legend lore. So if there is a person, place, or thing of legendary importance, you gain some information about that person, place, or thing. And it suggests making it more mysterious with figurative language, because that's easy for the DM to come up with on the spot. And it says, if the thing you named isn't of legendary importance, you gain no information. What constitutes legendary importance? I mean, if it's a magic item, I guess it means a legendary magic item or an artifact. That's actually codified. But what does a person, place, or non-magical thing, when do we know if they're legendary? Is there a rule for that somewhere, or guidance within the rules that I'm unaware of? You could just get rid of this sentence. I mean, nobody is casting legend lore on Tom the Baker's potato garden unless there's good reason to cast legend lore on Tom the Baker's potato garden. In which case, maybe there is a secret lore pertaining to it. In which case, great. Let the spell do what it's supposed to do. I do appreciate their example of figurative language, that it's still easy to decipher and contains useful information. So definitely keep that in. But what you don't want to have happen is expend a high-level slot to cast a circumstantial spell and have it do nothing. That shouldn't even be a possibility. That said, another fix that you could do is you could just make this a ritual. Though I think that if this spell always works, it would sometimes be worth the spell slot. Swift Quiver. So this is the spell that looks good on first reading. maybe even second reading. But just try using this spell. Use your bonus action to get 2 bonus action ranged attacks on your turn. But a little problem, you just used your bonus action, so too bad. The obvious fix here is at the start of the second paragraph, where it should obviously say, when you use your bonus action to cast this spell, you make 2 attacks with a weapon that uses ammunition from the quiver. On each of your turns until the spell ends, you can use your bonus action to make 2 more attacks with the same weapon. Still not great, but not getting a single extra attack for the entire round that you cast this spell, that's ridiculous and it has to go. Level 7, Mordenkainen's Sword. So this is infamously bad, and I think I've actually got a really nice solution here. But it's infamously bad because it's so much worse than Spiritual Weapon. Though they've nerfed Spiritual Weapon in the playtest, so it now uses concentration, so both these spells use concentration now, and they said that Spiritual Weapon always should have used concentration, so removing concentration here probably isn't the right direction. But if we upcast the new nerfed Spiritual Weapon, the new playtest version that is, to 7th level, it'd be doing 68 damage, plus your spellcasting ability modifier with each hit. This is 3d10, same damage type. Are you kidding me? It doesn't even move any faster than Spiritual Weapon. 68 plus ability modifier is averaging about 32 damage. So what could we do to Mordenkainen's Sword to make it worth a 7th level slot? And I think I've got something. Here is Blade of Disaster. This is a 9th level spell. I have used it in play multiple times, and it's okay for a 9th level spell. Makes 2 attacks when you cast it, and as a bonus action on following turns. Take this. Make it 1 attack, and you have yourself a decent 7th level spell. And check this out. If you cast a spell with a 9th level slot and you attack with a sword, you may attack twice. And then you just incorporated Blade of Disaster into the player's handbook without needing a separate entry. Gotta say, I'm pretty happy with this one. Prismatic Spray. So you create a 60-foot cone and everyone in the area makes a dexterity saving throw and you roll randomly what color ray affects them. Odds are you'll do a random damage type, which is going to be 10d6 or half on a successful save. But perhaps it will be a random condition, or nothing on a successful save. Or 1 chance in 8, they get hit by 2 rays. So it being random is a disadvantage. Why are almost all of these effects worse than equivalent level spells where you know what you're going to get? So here's what I would do here. I'd keep the original text in the first paragraph the same except for the last sentence of the first paragraph. And that would read, for each target, roll 2d6 to determine which color rays affect it. If you roll doubles, the target is affected by the violet ray as well as the ray corresponding to the number rolled. Then I'd have 1 to 6 on this chart stay the same. Then the violet ray doesn't need to be assigned a number, and the 8th option is removed. So everyone hit gets affected by 2 rays. Random, that's a disadvantage, but you stack them up, and that's an advantage, and so overall you end up with a decent spell. Level 8, Control Weather. So this is a circumstantial spell, which is fine. But why is this spell so slow? 10 minutes to cast, and then it takes another d4 times 10 minutes for the weather to actually change at all. And even then, it's just 1 step on one of these tables. So let's say it's a clear, warm, and calm day, and you want it to be a raging sleet storm. So that's 4 steps on table 1, 2 more on table 2, and 3 more on table 3. So that's 9 steps, 9d4. So on average, that's going to take you about 4 hours. So for the first 50 years of my life, I lived on the prairies. And I'll tell you what, many times I've seen it where it is calm and warm and cloudless and nice, and it's a summer day, and 20 minutes later, you've got hailstones being thrown at you the size of golf balls. And I'm sure anyone listening on the prairies can relate. Weather changes much faster naturally than this spell is able to change it magically. That's ridiculous. So the first thing, get rid of the D4. When you complete the 10-minute casting, you can move one step on all of the tables, then another step every 10 additional minutes. Incendiary cloud. So a short duration fog cloud, but it also does damage and moves away from you at the start of each of your turns. 10d8 fire damage when it appears, when someone enters the area, or when they end their turn there, and then they save for half damage. For comparison, if you were to cast Wall of Fire with an 8th level slot, they'd take 98 damage when the spell appears, save for half, but if they entered the wall afterwards or ended their turn there, they take the 98 fire damage with no saving throw. They just take full damage automatically. And that's what they should do here. The cloud appears, make a save for half damage. Enter the cloud or end your turn there, you just take the damage with no save. So I think that would balance the spell, but I also think this spell could be clarified because this bottom sentence reads, the cloud moves 10 feet directly away from you. Okay, so I know the direction now. In a direction that you choose at the start of each of your turns. So is it directly away from me or a direction I choose? Or do they think that directly away from me includes multiple directions? Because it really shouldn't, right? Directly away is directly away. So I don't know what that means. And I honestly don't care all that much whether it's directly away from you or you choose a direction or you choose a direction that is ultimately away from you. Whatever it is fine, but clarify it, please. Level 9, Weird. So, unless you mistake Storm of Disaster for a combat spell, Weird is pretty much agreed upon as the worst 9th level spell in the game. Why? Because it's Phantasmal Killer with an area of effect. And we already went over Phantasmal Killer. Wait, we already went over Phantasmal Killer. So what did we do? We did 60-10 damage right off the bat, save for half, and 60-10 continual if you failed your saving throw. You know what? No, even if we apply that, this still shouldn't be a 9th level spell. So let's give it some additional buffing. What if it affected each creature of your choice within a 30-foot radius sphere? Now we're getting somewhere. I mean, it's 9th level. You know what? Let's make it a 40-foot radius sphere, and you choose who is affected. I don't know if that's enough, but that's a fair amount of buffing. So here are the comments I'd love to see on this video. First off, is there a spell that you can identify in the player's handbook that I should have mentioned here, but neglected to mention? And if so, why did it need to be mentioned, and what should the changes have been? Now, if it's a spell not in the player's handbook, like you look at Skywrite and you say, why didn't he talk about Skywrite? It's because it's not in the player's handbook. I was just talking about player's handbook and things we might see in the 2024 player's handbook. I don't want to see Skywrite in the 2024 player's handbook. Just let it go. The second thing I'd like to see in the comments is if you did identify one of the spells I mentioned as one that you thought also needed buffing, but you thought it should be buffed in a different way. Maybe I didn't buff it enough. Maybe I buffed it too much. Maybe you see some issues with the way I buffed it. Then let me know what those are. But for now, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.